First things first, let's learn how to handle the multi-step process of authenticating to DNA Center using Python. Think back to the previous module where we used Postman and curl to interactively grab an access token. We then used the token in subsequent HTTP requests. To do this in Python, we'll use the requests library. First, we need to install it with pip. Before we explore the Python code, let's use the interactive Python interpreter to learn what is available with the requests library. We could also scour the public documentation, but the requests library is quite intuitive and a little bit of exploration goes a long way. First, let's import requests. If we want to see a list of attributes and methods that are available in this module, we can use the dir function. Specifically, I want to call your attention to a few key methods such as get, post, put, delete, and request. I'm only highlighting a few of them, but trust me, all of the different HTTP methods are here. For a more generic action, you can use requests.request and then just specify which action you want to take, but I prefer using the specific methods as it's a bit less typing. If we look at the doc page for the request method, it will reveal all the different minor options we can specify for any of our HTTP requests. The required parameters are the method, which would be a string like get, post, put, or delete. Also required is the URL for the resource being acted upon. After that, there are many optional parameters. For example, we can specify a JSON body to include, perhaps in an HTTP post that adds a new network device. We can also specify HTTP headers as key value pairs in a dictionary, much like Postman. We won't scrub this whole document as I'll explain these options as we encounter them. Last, I want to show you the functionality that is contained in the response object. When we issue a request, the API will return a response, and this response will carry information such as the body content and a status code. There are many attributes here, so let's put them into context by exploring the Python code next. The first thing I'm doing is importing the requests module, much like we did in the interpreter. That will give us access to the HTTP client functionality we need. I'm defining a getToken method so we can reuse this code for our future challenges. Remember, functional decomposition is a pillar of good coding. I define 3 local variables just to simplify things. First, I define the API path, which uses the URL provided by DevNet. Then, I create a 2-tuple containing the username and password. The requests library will use this for HTTP basic auth during our HTTP post to grab an access token. Last, I define the required headers dictionary, which sets the content type to application JSON. This workflow should remind you of Postman and curl. With this data, we can issue our post request for an access token. I'm using the requests.post method and passing in 3 parameters. First is an F string that takes our base API path and appends the specific resource we want to access. We don't want to repeat ourselves by typing the API path over and over. I'm showing the full string in orange so you can see how it fits together. Then we pass in our authentication tuple. Sometimes you'll see this implemented as shown in orange, which is really just a more explicit version to achieve the same result of using HTTP basic auth within requests. Last, we pass in our headers. Each request returns a response object. I am calling this one authResp. We can pick this object apart to see what information came back. Before we drill into the response, let's ensure the request succeeded. The raise4status method will raise an HTTP error if the status code is 400 or greater, signaling a client or server error. If the HTTP status code is less than 400, it does nothing. If you recall, the response body is a JSON dictionary containing a single key named token with a capital T. We can convert the body text to JSON and then extract the token. That will give us our token string, which I am returning. To test our code, I've written a small main function. All I do is call getToken and print out the value. These last two lines in the script ensure that main is called whenever this module is run directly from the shell. When we import this Python module elsewhere, main won't be called. Let's execute this code and ensure we see a token printed out. Okay, that looks perfect. Let's modify our code by passing in the wrong credentials to ensure our failure logic works too. I changed the username to be Nick123, so let's run it again. Now our script fails. The status code was 401, a client error meaning unauthorized. The stack trace helps developers troubleshoot the problem. Let's move on to our first challenge that involves doing something a bit more interesting with the requests library.